All right, hello everybody. Welcome to the Fuse Show. Joined by my guest today, Greg Segall of Alyce. Our topic is scaling for success, leadership, alignment, trust, and purpose. And our tagline for today's show is the challenge and opportunity of creating a new business category, personal experience, why it's necessary, and how it addresses the big why. Bio for Greg is Greg's a serial entrepreneur, founder, and CEO of Alyce. He's on a mission to fundamentally change the way people invest in business relationships using corporate gifting, swag, and experiences. The Alyce mission is to help everyone create personal bonds with the people they do business with. Welcome to the show, Greg.
Thanks a lot, Jim.
So let's jump right into it. Give us an understanding of what Alyce does. What's the value you bring to your clients?
So think about how people invest in relationships right now in business. And you think about the communications between different people. People email, people do LinkedIn messaging, people call, voicemail. I mean, I'll have 10 calls on this by the time I'm done, with the show here with you. It's super cheap, right? It's very easy for me just to blast off and automate all of that. And I think that's the old game right now where people have constantly just anchored on quantity. How many messages can I get off to somebody rather than actually thinking about what's the quality of that? And the world is moving very quickly towards how do I get to know somebody well and invest in them in that same context. And when you look at the investments you make into somebody, gifts, swag, experiences, right, rewards, incentives, all the things there, meals, tickets, trips, whatever it might be, that's the most emotional thing you can do with somebody. It's the biggest tight experience you can actually, connect with somebody. But yet everybody takes the same exact approach to all of that same digital communication that's basically saturated in the market right now. So when you look at gifts and swag and all the experiences and everything else that surrounds it, that's a place where you can actually have the biggest impact and the biggest emotional resonance with somebody and also connect with them on a truly personal level, hence the shirt, right? So, I think that's the key thing, which is, well, how do you do that? We'll use a platform like Alyce that allows you to do that on a one-to-one basis at high scale. And we do that because we have the ability to not send and, invest in the person by sending them the actual thing, right? Like chocolate feet to get my foot in the door, cheesy campaigns or something like that, but actually allow them to choose something they actually want. Because at the end of the day, it's about what they want, not about what you want, which actually drives the emotional connection with somebody. So Alyce does that by giving the power, the superpowers to each individual person who's using this, whether it's a marketer, sales rep, CS rep, HR person, whatever it might be, and allows them to actually have that experience, driven through.
So in other words, not sending a steak dinner to a vegan.
Yes, exactly. Or sending me a golf outing when I'm a baseball, basketball, football guy, or fitness buff, and sending me like chocolates and stuff where I'm psychotic about what I put in my body.
Yeah. I would argue that that's even worse because it brings the realization of the fact that like this person really doesn't actually know me. I think it would feel just disingenuous to get something like that.
Yeah, 100%. When I started Alyce, one of the key things that, or key moments that I remember back from basically the impetus for this was my previous business. We had about 40 partners as a whole, and I knew these folks like the back of my hand. I knew their kids. I knew what they like to eat. I knew where they like to go. I knew their dogs' names. We saw each other 7-8 times a year on top of, the ability for us to be communicating via all the other channels. And yet they would always send me the same stuff. And this one guy sent me, I always tell the story, but like I like my size medium, shirts or jackets. And yet he sends me a extra large jacket and then covers the entire jacket with Hershey's Kisses, for the holiday season, which melted, ruined the entire jacket. So again, going back to the difference between like emails or like cheap digital communications, the investment and the money put into this can either have a much more positive emotional impact and connection with the person, or a completely negative aversion, creates a negative aversion to what you're actually trying to accomplish.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. Let's jump into the idea of creating a new business category. And we mentioned this in the tagline, and that is personal experience.
Yep.
So I'm just curious to understand like what's driven you to create that. What are some of the challenges that you face in the process of doing that?
So personal experience is the next step past customer experience, or even when you think of account-based marketing, how you're always thinking about that on the brand to brand level or the account to account level. And where everybody's moving right now is past the individual account and what's my engagement there, down to what are the people involved in each aspect of that.
Yeah.
And there's a maturity and like a path that's going to be taken towards this. So why should it always be anchored on customer experience when underneath the customer are people and individual people, personal relationships between those individual people? So how you treat them, how you invest in them, how you drive that through feeds up into the customer experience, or account-based marketing or account-based everything. If you're looking at that, it's really people-based marketing.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, that's most important in terms of how you're thinking about it. So when you look at creating a category takes years, and it takes a long time, and there's a maturity to that. And there's a lot of money and a lot of efforts that have to be done in terms of educating the space. And we're in the early innings of what that looks like right now. But you start to take shape in terms of people asking about, well, what does this mean, and how do I shift this whole perspective? And right now, people are bringing up old monikers, like, oh, it's human to human, or it's business to human, or whatever it might be. And there's no real true connection to what is the actual surrounding elements around that. Cool, it's a human to human, but what's the actual approach and the framework and the ability for you to actually drive that forward? And that's why we're trying to build a platform that actually facilitates and actually controls that entire personal experience all the way through.
Yeah, that makes sense. I've had a lot of conversations with founders that maybe are new to the B2B space, and they just want to fundamentally think of B2B sales or relationships or connections as altogether different. And at the end of the day, and we have very large deal sizes for our clients. So definitely very B2B, but it's all relationship based. It's all, it is that human connection that so I don't even think about that. It's like ultimately, even in the very largest decisions, very largest businesses, people are making the decisions. They're deciding to move forward with people they know, like, and trust.
Yeah, 100%. There's another macro event that's happening, or macro change that's happening in the market too, which is people are actually becoming a different role in the buying journey. As you think about that, it used to be that it was very much about people meeting people. You trust the person, you buy the product from them, especially go back 15, 20 years ago, even 10 years ago, even 5 years ago. And then as automation and as all this stuff has happened, where folks have moved much more towards, I want to be educated before I even go into the human connection with a company. A lot of these buyers are a hell of a lot more educated now than they were before, which means that the impact of those connections, which again is why when you think about the investment in the relationship, you have a condensed time frame for that, and also a preconceived notion of who that person is and what the product actually is able to do for you in terms of the value that you're buying. Now the human connection is really about the trust factor and the loyalty and the rapport that's being built, so that even if a product is marginally better than somebody else, they're still going to anchor on who do they want to buy from. Like, people like to buy from people they like and trust. That's like the age-old cliche. So that's just becoming more enlightened and much more heightened. Again, why we call it personal experience, because it's really being anchored on what's the personal experience that you're building from the outset all the way through the customer relationship, and even in the HR side of things. Like, people inside the organization have to like each other as you go into that as well.
Yeah. Let's use that as a segue to talking about culture at Alyce. And I've heard you say that the word culture is thrown around a lot, but it's really more about the values of the business. And I'm curious to have you dive deeper into that sentiment.
So yeah, culture is a very loaded word when you think about it, and I think it has lack of definition that actually runs it into problems when people say, well, define your culture. What they're really asking for there is they're saying define your values as a business, which actually defines everything that happens surrounding that. So when you look at a business, the culture is matched up between what's the vision of the business, what are the values of the business, and how do you actually connect those two things together in terms of the type of people you're bringing in, and then the connection to those two things that actually align all the decisions that are happening inside the organization as well. So I'll give you an example. When I started the business, this is my third company, my previous two businesses, I was not very intentional with the values or the actual why of the business right from the get-go. And when I started Alyce, I also had my daughter, who's now going to be, so I know exactly how old Alyce is because I know how old my daughter is. So, my daughter's about to turn 5, Alyce is just about 5 or a little over 5 years old right now. And when my wife was pregnant, I was looking at this massive shift that was happening in my world, which was going from a me-centric world to a holy cow, everything's going to be about how do I make the world a better place for my daughter. And when I looked at my previous businesses, all the values were very me-centric across the board versus this business, where if you look at the original whiteboard that I had in terms of what the original idea was for Alyce, where I saw the market going, what the functionality was going to be, which still exists to this day, like that all the original hypotheses still prove out there. What I wrote down what I call the 3 pillars of giving, and every employee that joins up with Alyce or wants to join up Alyce has to align with these 3 pillars of giving and understand that this is what we're truly building as an organization here. The first pillar of giving is, how do you make giving between people truly authentic and truly a moment that brings people together, right? And that's obviously that ties directly to what the business model is for Alyce and whatnot. The second pillar of giving is, how do you give back to the planet? How do you make everything sustainable? Because there are hundreds of billions of dollars being spent on all the categories that we talked about. It's wasteful, completely wasteful. Stop sending me chocolates. Stop sending me large jackets. Stop, with all the squish balls and the other stuff that's there. And you're seeing the markets very slowly move more and more towards that direction. I think COVID actually threw that even into more of a heightened place where people are going to be much more conscious about that. And then the third thing is, how do you give back to those in need? That's the third pillar. So how do you build it in, which is where donations was a big piece of the give back message of Alyce. And I said, well, how do I take those 3 pillars of giving and then tie that directly into everything that we do inside of the business and make that the business model? So when you look at the values of the people, you want to understand, are they me-centric or are they you-centric? Because if they're customer-centric and they're, cross-functionally you-centric, it makes for the fabric that actually drives the business towards this vision, which is authentically about how are we actually fundamentally making the world a better place and driving authenticity at scale. That's the whole entire backing behind the vision for Alyce and the values of Alyce. So when you take that, that's ingrained in the culture. We live it authentically internally. We call it the 5 to 9, right? Like your 5 to 9, which is the opposite of 9 to 5, is as important as your 9 to 5. Like that makes you you. That's where trust and all this stuff happens there, and that has to be connected back to what makes you you in terms of the professional world.
Yeah. I think that there's so many avenues I want to go down, but one of the things that comes to mind is I think that one of the foundational elements to this is the idea of an abundant mindset. And I'm reminded we've brought on, I was telling the producer just a few minutes ago, we brought on multiple new clients in just the last couple of weeks. We went through a series, like a period where we went through the desert for 5 months and had no new clients. And one of our head team leaders came to me and he's like, Jim, this is just crazy. We've got to onboard these clients. I know you need help with that. I'm going to forego my paternity leave and not go on paternity leave. And I said, like, hell you are. You're not going to do that. There's this idea of like, no, man, like we're playing the long game, and that is more important than a short-term win. We can cover this. We can make this happen. But it's like, and I'm speaking from a place of like, I wouldn't have been able to do that in my younger years, or had it not been for, the experience of my 5 children, going from that me-centric to you-centric. And I want to correlate that to the idea of abundance, but how do you see that? How do you understand that? Because I think you have to start with that paradigm to be able to even get to this way of thinking.
Yeah. I think, again, having 3, this is my 3rd company. The first company was all about 17-hour days, 7 days a week. And if anyone else doesn't really live up to that same structure and that same expectation, then it's a failure. Right? It's like similar companies that have been thrown into like the wind now, where it was like butts and seats type of mentality, right? It's not, it doesn't make any sense when you think about that. It's just like how you need to treat somebody. It's like the whole person is what matters. And if you can't bring your whole self to work, and you can't authentically do that, especially with us, with our mission, about authenticity at scale and really driving that and the impact in the world, how the hell are you supposed to exude that or productize that and actually build something against that as you grow the business? So when we deal that with employees, I mean, it is almost 5 to 9 first over 9 to 5, which makes the 9 to 5 exponentially more impactful, because the love of the business and the love of the values and the vision of the business are so intertightly connected. That's there. There's so many companies that BS that. But it's the next wave of where companies are moving towards, and it's just like, how do you be good to your people? And people always say that. That's why I hate the word culture, because it's not about culture. It's about the values and the intrinsic connective tissue and fabric and DNA that started from the beginning, early stages of the business. And that's something, again, you can't understand that until you're in the space and you're understanding that the care is and love is actually like truly authentic across the business in terms of how everybody supports each other. It doesn't mean we can't argue with each other, and it doesn't mean that we're not a team where we're actually all fighting together, and that, there's going to be tiffs and tuffles, and like you have to actually be able to challenge each other. But the fabric of it, again, is about how are you giving to each other and putting you over me, in every single thing, and thinking at least about what you and me are equal in terms of how we're driving that through.
Okay, so let me ask you this. Do you think you can build culture without ever thinking about or really talking about culture, just by the way that you treat people, having that abundant mindset? And I know you aren't expecting this, but I've got to share. Like I was looking at your LinkedIn, and there's a recommendation section. So first of all, I noticed that you've received 7 recommendations and have given more than double that at 15. And the most recent one is to a lady named Julia, who left Alyce, and after that you wrote her a very lengthy, very kind recommendation. I mean, that just points to the abundant mindset. So what I'm getting at is, can culture be created just that way, where you have these principles and these values, and you treat people well, and that develops the culture over time without you ever sitting with the board or whatever and be like, let's talk about culture today?
So you have to be intentional. Intentionality means that you have a stated framework. Framework's the wrong word, but a stated set of those values, the stated set of things that you're actually building around that. But at the end of the day, everyone says, what are your values? What are the things that make you great as a business? At the end of the day, it's just like any business. There's a million ideas. It always comes down to execution. You can have a moderate idea and amazing execution and turn to something magically humongous. You can have the best idea in the world and shitty execution, and and you basically fall flat on your face, as you go there. It's the same thing with culture. Yeah. Like the intentionality and your ability to actually drive with that, but then in every action in the business and driving in terms of how we talk about it in every meeting and how we think about it in terms of the leaders we're bringing in and how that's driven down and cascaded as the company's, like 10x'd in the last couple of years. It's very, very, it has to be backed by action. And a lot of times, like what ends up happening is, and I talked about this on a different show before, is my voice is a lot less in the business, but it's so much more powerful because they hear from me a lot less than it used to be. 2 years ago, I was in the same room with a big chunk of our employees where they saw me every single day. They heard from me every single day. I'd be in medium conversations or whatever it is. Now it's like some people might not hear from me only once a month, in terms of like really seeing me or whatever it is. I have tons of other communication channels that I use on that. But every one of those pieces has to reinforce that no matter what you do as you grow the business.
Would you agree with the statement? This just came to my mind that, like culture, like a company will have a culture regardless, right? Whether you're intentional or not, like there will be a natural development of some sort of a culture. Is that fair to say?
Yeah. I mean, here's the beauty of what happens as a company scales. You set the initial DNA and the framework, but and this is also something we've been very intentional with Alyce, you have to bring in, which I know this is like the hot word of the period right now, but as we've always talked about this, we've talked about diversity of people, backgrounds, like their prospects, the like perspectives that they're bringing into the business. And that just matures that culture. Because what you're doing is you're bringing in folks that are challenging some of that, evolving it, because even the culture you set out to build, like that forms the foundation. It's like you driving pillars into the ground and you're building a foundation around it. If you build the house, the cultural house on top of a bunch of rocks, you're going to have all these cliques of different culture inside the organization. If you drive it with intentionality and a solid foundation, which I failed to do in my previous 2 businesses, just being very honest, it's allowed this business to have that as a foundation to fall back on as you might need to reposition a room, or you might need to redecorate on, something that's there. Going down a horrible analogy here, but like that hopefully gives an idea that's there. Is you have to be thinking about how you're driving that. And for us, our culture's only blossomed tremendously as it's gone from 2 people, that started working on the business, really it was like 3.5 years ago, to where we are now, where it's 170 plus people, going to be close to 200 soon enough, in terms of how does that brought in and how is that actually, exuded and carried through each branch off the tree, that's helping to look to see what are those roots of the culture that's been built.
Have you witnessed your passion and just the way that you go about things trickle down in leadership? Because I think often about scale, and we're at 40, roughly 40 full-time staff now. And I'm at that stage now, and I'm sure a lot of founders can relate, where it's like it's no longer as feasible for me to know everybody on a personal level, and I recognize that we're growing quickly, and like I feel like that my focus has shifted more towards mentorship of our leadership team, bringing leaders up and trying to have the idea of like our abundant mindset trickle down. What has been your experience with that in terms of mentoring and building leaders at Alyce?
So the first thing again is the folks that you hire into the business, you don't know everything about them, right? I mean, that's just the reality, but you can suss them out. And again, if you anchor very heavily on that DNA and use that as a core piece of how you're bringing folks into the business, by default, you're already having at least a good chunk of alignment in terms of how that's going to be cascaded down.
Sure.
And for us, again, as a business grows, you end up building more and more layers into the business, specifically because you just need to build accountability structures in the business and cross-functional alignment and ownership, across an organization that's there. But that's not just metrics. That's also, and it's not just the tangible stuff, it's a lot of the intangible things that actually help you drive that through. So for us, and what I spend a lot of my time on, and this is something that was coming from one of my executive coaches, was you have to realize that leadership is actually only about 10% of the business, 10% of your time. Like you should understand that management and execution are another big portion of that. And again, as you move up the chain of command inside any organization, leadership and management becomes a much larger piece of your time, and execution obviously either dwindles and goes away, or it's a very, very tiny piece of that as you go. So what I look at there is I say, one of the key things that you have to be always thinking about is how are you training and teaching and driving a lot of the leadership elements all the way through that portion, and how do you make sure that each one of those leaders are also hearing and feeding back and being
Greg,
the eyes and
if you're
ears
still
for the
with
rest
me,
of the
I've
organization
lost
as you go through that too. Yeah, you back?
Yeah, I'm back.
Perfect.
We'll fix that in post.
Okay. You want to ask the question again?
I forgot how I phrased the question. You're going to be recorded, so we'll just your entire side will be recorded. So we'll just take that and we'll start.
I stopped there, and I was like, hello, So yeah, we can go there. What you asked there was, as you scale up the business, and you said you're at 40 people, how do you train and teach and drive the cultural values through the business there as well, when you're not able to, you moved more to a mentorship thing. So I don't know if you want to re-ask that. We can talk about that again.
Sure. Yeah, let's do that. So Greg, we're at roughly 40 people. I think we have a bad lag. Let's let it pause for just a second. Okay, you ready to start again?
Mm-hmm. Go ahead.
So Greg, we're at roughly 40 people, and it's been on my mind a lot, the idea of scaling. And I'm curious how you think of scaling from a leadership perspective, and especially that making sure that your leadership team is aligned in terms of the mission and values and just the general abundant mindset that you have.
Yeah, I think as you look at any team as it's continuing to grow, when you go to hire those individual folks, a big portion of that interview process is understanding and really diving into the DNA and the values of the business and making sure that they fit into that as you go, especially as you're looking and hiring into different leadership and management portions of the business that's there. And that forms this tight connection between, at least mostly aligned around what those values are and what that DNA is. So then it's a matter of how do you then use your time to also allow them to be eyes and ears to feed up and feed down that mission and those values as we're thinking about things. And you bring that up and you think about that. And again, that's the difference between the tangibles of metrics versus the intangibles of the cultural elements of how we make decisions and how we think about every element of what's going on in the business. When you hire, on the front lines of the business, it's very important that the layers down, across the business are also very well aligned on that. But again, that's why if you hire and you have the right folks that are in the most connection with you, you're always bringing this up. We're always talking about things, that are related to the actual culture and the values of the business, which then you can tell, because I also do a lot of skip levels and a lot of time, at least once or twice a month, where you're trying to get a sense for each team in terms of how are those actually, contributing and getting connected and driven through the whole business as well. Which again, I know is not going to always scale forever, but close to 200 people, you at least have time enough, and I need to make enough time because that still to me is such an important piece of everything we have to do to drive the business. Even if we're 1,000 people, you still have to have enough ear on the ground and enough trust of the people there to be able to actually still have the connection there and understanding what's going on.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Let me ask you this. Is Alyce the largest business that you've ran?
Solo, yes. Previous business that I had sold.
In terms of number of people, I guess is what I'm getting at.
Yeah. Well, I was going to people too, actually. So number of people. So solo, yes, by myself. The previous agency, we grew was about 100 people between existing employees and sort of the other partners and folks that we were working with around the world. And the business that I then joined was closer to 500 people. So I was able to see a lot of these things in a very different perspective, with that company, which is now about 1,200 people or 1,300 people or so, about 7 years later. So yes, in terms of me continuing to drive the business solo, yes, this is the largest from a people perspective.
Okay. I want your input. One of the most predominant common threads when I have conversation with founders is almost all of them have an executive coach, like somebody that's helping them move along and upskill. And there's this idea of the founder, one founder type being the right fit to go from 0 to 1, and one founder type being the right fit or having the proper skills to go from 1 to N. So what are your thoughts on the idea of upskilling on this journey for founders that are experiencing scaling quickly? What would you say to them?
One of the key things I advise a lot of companies as well is I say a CEO's job is to put themselves out of a job, right? Not out of business, out of a job, right? So it's important yeah, exactly, right. You should laugh at that one. That was a slip there, right? So it's like a CEO's job is to put themselves out of a job. And what you have to be constantly thinking about there is how are you thinking about delegation and bringing in people that are smarter than you and are able to actually up-level you so you can actually be driving the valuable things inside of the business. Again, as a company scales, and many founders, even the ones that I advise, are very comfortable in the execution phase, but are not good at the looking around the corner phase in terms of like 2-3 corners down the road, which is like, well, what's really going to happen here and how am I continuing to adjust the business as that specifically goes? So I have 2 different executive coaches that I talk with fairly regularly, and most of it is actually geared around people, because in the end of the day, the people are the asset that get you to the actual fundamental problems inside of the business. I don't need the strategic side of things, and I feel like I have a good enough head in terms of the strategy and the vision, and I'm a very big picture type of a person, which means I've very much surrounded myself with very, very operational folks that like are operational first and strategic also as well, especially as you sort of get closer and closer to my direct reports. But that is really important to understand where your strengths and your weaknesses as a CEO and as somebody who knows where they are. If you're very operational, you're a very product, engineering related founder, of which many I advise, they need to surround themselves with the business type of folks that are there. If you're very business oriented or sales oriented, you have to surround yourself with the right product people to help you actually, and operational people around you to help make sure that what you're doing and how you're actually selling the product and stuff actually fits into that. So there's a lot of thought and a lot of intentionality that has to go around that as you understand where your weakness is and how do you surround the business around that. That's how you scale yourself. That's how you put yourself out of a job and make sure that you're bringing in people that have been there, done that, and help you scale as you go. Because a CEO never is going to be, it doesn't matter if they've run a 50,000 person company, they're coming into a new organization. There's all new set of challenges and new set of problems that maybe you can lean on in some of those experiences. But like the other side of it is you're still learning. You're still having to evolve yourself and really understand what that journey is as well.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. I want to ask you about humility and leadership. And I read an article about a month ago, and I wish I could attribute it properly, but it was, I guess, pretty detailed analysis on the correlation between founder age and success. And they generally found, of course, it's not always true, but they generally found that the older a founder is, the more successful they tend to be. And it's especially impactful when they have some experience and they're like north of mid-30s. And it gets progressively better generally. But in my life, and I don't know if this is true for everybody, but the idea of humility has been a journey and still is a journey and a significant work in progress. But I am definitely in a better place now than I was 10 years ago. So you mentioned you made the comment of making sure that you're surrounding yourself with people that are smarter than you. And to do that requires a degree of humility to recognize like, hey, I'm not the smartest guy in the room. And I'm okay with that because I'm attached to this greater vision and mission. And that's what needs to happen to move the business forward. But you have to get out of your own way to do that. So what would you say about that idea, just the general humility in leadership?
I couldn't agree with you more on that. It's taken me, I'm 41 now, so it's taken me, a good 21 years, really. I mean, the first company I started was 19. So, it's taken me, 23 years to really understand that and to really drive into that. And again, when you start your first company, you go through your second company, you're onto your third company that's here. You start to recognize patterns in yourself, and you start to be fine with understanding like, I'm not right, and I don't have to be the one that's always right in the room, and I don't have to be the one that's always speaking up and taking credit for everything that's happening in there, which is kind of like everyone's early 20s. Like you have this chip on your shoulder because you're trying to prove yourself out, as you go. And as you get to later in life, and I think also being a parent helps a lot with this too, because it helps you understand like you being always right is the worst thing you could do to train your, teach your kids, in terms of how to actually react in a lot of these situations. It's really about teaching them humility, which then forces you to really look at yourself in the face that's there. So I think just that the last 5 years have been this very like renaissance, is what I'd call it right now in terms of how I've looked at the business and myself. And again, that it, like, having my daughter while I started this business, like fundamentally changed it. Like if I had my daughter 2 years into it, the DNA might actually be different right now, and then you build some baggage into the business where you can't ever really undo that. It doesn't matter what you do. It doesn't matter what new head of people you bring in, there's going to be an ingrained set of DNA that's built into the business. So I love like, when I'm interviewing somebody, and this is the sort of cheating thing, for anyone I'm interviewing now, it's like, challenge me. The folks that challenge me back in a, not an asshole-ish way, but like in a very positively constructive way, are the people I immediately get, trust around, because they're actually showing me that they have, experiences, or they're actually asking questions that help to actually push the business forward on that. And boy, I'll tell you, my 20s, somebody did that to me. I was kind of like, yeah, sure. You know what I mean? Like, it was kind of this like negative reaction to it, rather than like, wow, would I love to work with this person who's actually going to help, fulfill and drive the business, more and more forward as it goes.
Yeah. It's interesting. I see a lot of corollaries in our business with parenting. And I had this great moment the other day. That was probably a couple of weeks ago. And it was pretty emotional. Like one of our team leaders just killed it. And it was somebody that I have been working with for a while on kind of a mentorship basis. And then he handled this thing by himself and did an amazing job. And the conversation was recorded, and I was just later watching it back. And it was an emotional experience because it was just so neat to see that evolution, and I could like this. It's the realization that this doesn't need to be about me, So yeah, I lead the company, but I want them to be successful, and not just at our business, but in their career, in their life. It like your recommendation to Julia, right? Like there's this idea of like, look, I want you to be successful even if it's not with us. And I think that kind of mindset just permeates the organization. I don't know. Just for myself, I could have never done that when I was younger.
Yeah. I call it the stepping stone theory, which is every company has a certain set of stepping stones that they provide somebody. And sometimes those stepping stones go in a different direction, and sometimes those stepping stones allow somebody to continue to grow with the business as it goes. And there's places where the business outgrows the person outgrows the business in terms of the opportunity that they want, there, or they grow with the business. There's not much more complexity to it than that. And you have to be thinking about what are those stepping stones you're providing, and how intentional are you able to actually make those stepping stones available to somebody as that goes there. So I'm always looking at that, and there's something we're always trying to do a better job of as a company to look at that and provide that. But when that person takes the next stepping stone, you have to take a moment as the direct manager, but also as myself, to like say, that's an awesome moment where you saw that person do that. We have a couple of promotions coming up right now, and it's really cool to see how that plays into it, where you're giving the person the next challenge, that's there. So yeah, it's it's always tough, but that is a mentality you also have to drive in the business, where also when that stepping stone isn't there for the next person, you are just super happy and grateful. And we do that with any person that's going to be leaving the business. I've said that since day one. Like, we don't hide from it. We don't say anything. And it could be a good or bad situation, because there's sometimes where we as a company have effed up, in terms of like not providing the right stepping stones for the person. And then we're like, crap, I think we've gotten much better at that over the last couple of years. But the company's growing, and you can't solve every problem, and you can't also take that personally. But it is something where when that stepping stone does end up there, it's pretty amazing, to see that, and it's really prideful, from a you versus a me perspective.
Yeah, it is. I'm curious to know more about how you balance your work and family life, and what comes to mind is I know there's this pressure among founders, and maybe particularly young founders, to work 18 hours a day and just to really push. And I think there's seasons of life where that makes sense. My co-founder is 10 years younger than me, and he isn't married, doesn't have any children. So he's at that season of life where it just works for him, and he's accumulating experience quickly, and it just makes sense. But I've made mistakes in my past where I've put the business first over my family. And because of that, my wife has kind of built up a sense of resentment towards the business, where it's like the business is competing with her. And I thought, like I want to do this business, I want to play the long game. And part of the strategy there is to make sure I'm going at a pace that makes sense. And also that I'm being very careful not to behave in a way that causes my wife to resent the business. And like that literally just happened this morning. Like yesterday, my 14-year-old daughter's been pushing, trying to get into Palms. She had this tryout experience last night after a year of working so hard, and she didn't get in, and it was crushing to her. So, we're up like 1 a.m. talking. My wife and I are up again at 5 a.m. talking, and like right to the point of coming to the office to have a conversation with you. And I'm like, I was so tempted to be like, you know what? I need to leave. I need to prep more for my conversation with Greg. But I'm like, I can't. Like I'm prepped already. I've looked into Greg's background. Like I can do this, but like I got to be here for my family. So how do you balance? How do you see that?
It goes back to the intentionality again that we talked about, which was my first business, like I mentioned before, 17 hours a day, 7 days a week. That was everything. And what I've understood about this business versus my previous is that my previous business was my identity. It was so intertwined emotionally and logistically and physically in terms of everything that I did, that it was like, who are you as a person? Oh, well, I'm the CEO of One Pico is the name of the game, right? That's my company. Everything was led business first. Now when somebody asks me about who I am, I'm like, oh, I've got this 5-year-old daughter and my wife, and we went to BU, and I'm a fitness buff, and all this type of stuff that's there. And that's again going back to the 5 to 9 versus the 9 to 5. That was a big piece of starting up the company, where I was like, I want this to be different. So everybody in the company knows this. I shut down at 3 p.m. every single day, except for very rare occasions, right? Maybe one day a week, maybe one day every other week or so. From 3 till 7, I'm offline, right? I'll take random calls again, like if there's an exception, or like, we were fundraising and those stuff that was going on there. Like, I don't want it to sound like it's some, idealistic world that's there, but 3 to 4 days a week, like I am shut down. I go and like everybody knows this. If they have my 2:30 slot, I wrap up at about 2:53, because I go and pick up my daughter from school, down the street, and I walk home with her, and like that's my like quick daddy-daughter time, to be able to make that happen. And then we go to a park, right? And then I'm not checking emails. I'm not checking the other stuff that's happening there. People can text me if there's some emergency or something that happens, on that. And then I jump back on after I finish bath time, or I do stories and go from there. And then I'll go from 7:30 till 10:30, or whatever it might be. So I've been very, very intentional with that. And what that's actually allowed me to do is to say no to so many things that I don't need to actually do or concern myself with, because I've surrounded myself with people that will actually solve the problems there, and focus on the things that'll actually help drive the business to another place there. And that attitude and that perspective and that hard line there has fundamentally made my life happier. Like I said, my like mid-30s through till now has been my happiest time in my life, because I've been able to focus so much more on me and, you, meaning my daughter and my wife, and like the family and all those types of things. Because my wife and I have been together. We've known each other since we were 17. And you want to talk about resentment? When I was 17 hours a day, 7 days a week, You know what I mean? Like it's a lot of resentment was built up there, which was like, how are we not doing that again when my wife was pregnant and then she's like, wait, you're starting another business? Like, what psychotic thing are you actually getting yourself into, right now? So that was a fun conversation that was there. And I'm like, well, I want to start something. I'm a builder. It's in my nature.
Sure. One of the things related to this that I've been processing is the idea of highest and best use of time and contribution. And what I'm getting at is, I think by default, there's a time-based measurement. And it's like a badge of honor. I do think this is changing, which is positive, but there tends to be this badge of honor. Like, I work 17 hours a day, and I'm trying to think of a difference. Like, we had a new prospective client, one sales call, 45 minutes, and that client signs on doubling our business.
Yep.
45 minutes. I'm like, that is a good day. And it took 45 minutes. It's like I could have worked for hours and hours and hours at something that was not nearly as productive as that one conversation. And I tried to think about that, like where it's not just a measure of my time, but of my contribution, and feeling more successful when I spent a day, even if it was just 3 hours, aligned in the highest and best use of my time versus 10 hours just dinking around doing a bunch of different things.
Yeah. Time, when you go back to the concept of putting your CEO or anyone in your job, the best people are able to put themselves out of their own job. And that perspective is a very, very hard one to grasp, and a very hard one to actually truly execute on, because you always feel like you need to be the ruler of all things that are below you. And reality is you need to delegate all things below you in order for you to be focused on higher value things. Your time is inventory. Your time is connected to value. So how valuable is every hour that you're putting into is that really the best use of your time as you're thinking about how you're driving value in the business? And that's the measure when you look at that. And I look at how productive was my day. It comes down to, did I really need to be in that meeting, or do I trust my team that they could make the decision on that, right? And let them go make the decisions on that. And that's fundamentally changed my perspective in terms of where are my higher value things. Well, there's so many more valuable things I can be doing to become and planting seeds and driving seeds that are exponent factors in the business, rather than it being, oh yeah, I'm just going to be doing like this tactical thing where I'm going to be like, oh, you know what, like there's no one that's fixing the CSS on some random thing. I'm going to go in there and do it because I'm a coder, and I can actually do that, right? Which I have done, just as like, I'm going to get on the ground type of a thing that's there, but that's super few and far between. Like one time a year I'll do that just because I think it's fun, and it's like nice to get with some of the folks that are trying to drive things forward, right? So that you have to be thinking about time as value, and inventory of that value adds up over time, and how much more of that valuable inventory are you depositing to actually turn to something that's a hell of a lot more valuable over time.
Golly, that's so great. I'm curious, Greg, how often as a percentage of time do you get to the end of your day and feel accomplished, feel like you did good today?
It wavers. I mean, any founder or CEO knows this, that, there's some days where you're just in back to back to back, which happens to me all the time. Like today's one of those days where, start at 7:30 or so, in the morning, because I was interviewing a candidate, and doing a walk and talk, which is actually like a nice thing for me to be able to get out of the house, type of thing, all the way till 3, today, where it's going to be back to back to back. And I have to look and see what was valuable. Like, to me, this is a deposit of value in terms of people are going to see this and understand more about the business. And it's valuable for people to hear my voice and what Alyce means to me and what we're trying to actually accomplish as a business here, because that has broad reach, in terms of what this is. And you also learn something every time you're in those situations. So I would say 4 out of 5 days I feel accomplished on things. There are some days where I'm like, I have it on my to-do list, the first, like, I need to finish this 1 or 2 things today, and I don't get to it, and then I'm pissed off because then I have to do it on the weekends or something. Like, that's welcome to being a founder, in terms of that. And sometimes that founders will feel like it's 4 out of 5 days they're not accomplished on things. Those are the days you should be like reassessing how you're actually dividing up your time and stuff.
Yeah, that makes sense. Let's end with this. Let's go back to 2011, and current Greg is having a conversation with 31-year-old Greg, and you have an opportunity to give yourself advice. What would you say to your younger self?
I'd say listen to this conversation. Honestly, like, all the advice I'm giving you is stuff that I'd wish I'd known, back in the day. I think if you boil it down to like top themes, across that, it's again, it's realize it's not about you. It's about the other person. It's about everything you're doing for that. It's not about me. It's about you, right? So I think that we have these you shirts that we use that I wear in a lot of other podcasts, and I have about seven pairs of them. So people actually think I do laundry, and that's the first thing, because if you take that frame of reference, it allows you to actually drive towards all the other points of conversation we've had today here too, where you flip it around in terms of how are you being intentional with the business and how you're doing that. And the other thing is, I think that follow your gut. There's been a lot of times in my previous business where you would sit there and my gut was telling me something and I'm kind of like suppressing it and being like, nope. And then 6 months or 9 months later, you're like, oh God, I wish I had done this at that time. And I've been much better in this business. And what I would say too is like, emotionally detach yourself from the business and don't make it your identity. It's much more about how, if you can do that, you can make much better business decisions, which sometimes are very, very, very hard personal decisions, which is like honestly the worst part of being a CEO, because you just realize like the stepping stones aren't there, or something's not going well in the business, whatever it might be. That's the other piece of advice I would have given.
Yeah, that's so good. Well, Greg, you've been extremely generous with your time and have shared a tremendous amount of wisdom. This has been one of my favorite conversations. I'm looking forward to watching it and looking forward to sharing it. We'll be sharing on the landing page the link to Alyce, and we'll be sharing the link to your LinkedIn profile. Where's the best place for people to go, one, to learn more about Alyce, kind of get in touch with you guys there, and then to learn more about you and the way you view the world?
Yeah, it's simple. Just Alyce.com, ALYCE.com, and then LinkedIn. Just hit me up on LinkedIn, and I get a ton of spam on there, but that's it. Or email me at greg@alyce.com with 1 G, not 2.